I just realized. Hold on. Yep. Okay. Cool. My mouth is now moving. I realize this is probably gonna be one of the longest series on the channel. It's only episode 2 right now, by the way. If you really want to know the grand scheme of it, um, this may be one of the longest series on the channel when it comes to book readings because there's 18 episodes in total, and we're barely on episode 2. I mean, hey, if we do this 9 more times, you know, good news. There is good news in this. Before the episode properly starts. We already read the longest video being 30 pages. The second is 29, and the third is 28. Stonsey boy, and welcome back to Reading with Stonsey. Today we are reading just chapter 3 today. Pages, 31 to 47, I think? I'm pretty sure that's correct. Though I could be incorrect, in which case, then it would be incorrect. Or some amalgamation of what is and isn't correct. I mean, is true correctness even incorrect? I truly do not care. Though, and honestly, I don't think you do either. So, without further ado, and totally not an excuse just so I could replant my plants in Cookie Clicker real quick. 1 second. Never mind, I ran out of cookies. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 3, The Force of Destiny. The invitation came from Citra in early January. It arrived by post, which was the first indication that it was out of the ordinary. There was only 3 types of communications that arrived by post: packages, official business, or letters from the eccentric. The only type of people who wrote letters. This appeared to be in the third variety. Well, open it, Ben said, more excited than the envelope than Citra was. It had been handwritten, making it odder. True, handwriting was still offered as an elective, but aside from herself, she knew few people who had taken it. She tore the envelope open and pulled out a card with the same eggshell color as the envelope, then read to herself before reading it aloud. The pleasure of your company is requested by the Grand Civic Opera, January 9th, 7 p.m. There was no signature, no return address. There was, however, a single ticket to the envelope. The opera, said Ben. Ill. Citra couldn't agree more. Could it be some sort of school event? Their mother asked. Citra shook her head. If it was, it would say so. She took the invitation and the envelope from Citra to study them herself. Well, whatever it is, it sounds interesting. It's probably some loser's way of asking me on a date because he was too afraid to ask me by face. Do you think you'll go? Her mother asked. Mom, a boy who invites me to an opera is either joking or delusional, or he's trying to impress you. Citra grunted and left the room, annoyed by her own curiosity. I'm not going, she called out from her room, knowing full well that she would. The Grand Civic Opera was one of several places where anyone who was anyone went to be seen. At any given performance, only half the patrons were there in the actual opera. The rest were there to participate in the great melodrama of social climbing and career advancement. Even Citra, who moved in none of those circles, knew the drill. She wore a dress that she brought for the previous year's homecoming dance. When she was heard that Hunter Morrison would invite her, instead Hunter invited Zachary Zvane, which apparently everyone but Citra knew would happen. They were still a couple, and Citra, until today, hadn't had any use for the dress. When she put it on, she had far more pleased with it than she thought she'd be. A teenage girl's change in a year, but now the dress, which was more than wishful thinking last year, actually fit her perfectly. In her mind, she had narrowed down to 2 possibilities of their secret admirer. It could have been one of 5, only 2 of whom she'd enjoy spending an evening alone with. The other 3 she would endure for the sake of novelty. There was, after all, some fun to be had spending an evening pretending to be pretentious. Her father insisted on dropping her off. Call me when you're ready to be picked up. I'll take a public car home. Call anywhere, he said, and he told her she looked beautiful for the 10th time when she got out and she drove off to make room for the limousines and Bentleys in the drop-off queue. She took a deep breath and went up the marble steps, feeling an awkward and out of place as Cinderella at the ball. Upon entering, she was not directed toward either an orchestra or the central staircase leading to the balcony. Instead, the usher looked at the ticket, looked at her, then looked at the ticket again before calling over a second usher to personally escort her. What's all this about? She asked. Her first thought was that this was forged ticket that had been escorted to the exit. Perhaps it had been a joke after all, and she was already running a list of suspects through her mind. Then the second usher said, a personal escort is customary for a box seat, miss. Box seats, Citra called, were ultimate in exclusivity, and they were usually reserved for people too elite to sit among the masses. Normal people wouldn't afford them. but even they could if they weren't allowed access. As they followed the usher up the narrow stairs and left boxes, Citrus began to get scared. She knew no one with that kind of money. If this invitation came by her by mistake, or if there actually was some sort of big, important person waiting for Citra, what on earth were his or her intentions? Here we are, the usher pulled back the curtain in the box to reveal a boy her age sitting there. He had dark hair, light freckled skin. He stood up when he saw her, and Citra could see that the suit revealed a little too much of his socks. Hi, hello, and his usher left them alone. I left you in the seat close to the stage, he said. Thanks. She sat down, trying to figure out who this was, and why he had invited her here. She didn't appear familiar. Should she know him? She didn't want to let on that she didn't recognize him. Then, out of nowhere, he said, thank you. For what? He held up an invitation and looked exactly like hers. I'm not much into opera, but hey, it's better than doing nothing at home, so should I, know you? Citra laughed out loud. He didn't have a mysterious admirer. It appeared they both had a mysterious matchmaker, which set Citra working on another mental list. At the top of her were her own parents. Perhaps this was some son of their friends. This kind of subterfuge was pretty obtuse even for them. What's so funny? The boy asked, and she showed him her identical invitation. It had made him laugh. Instead, he seemed a bit troubled, but didn't share why. He introduced himself as Rowan, and they shook hands just as the lights dimmed. The curtain went up and the music exploded into lush and loud for them to be able to hold a conversation. The opera was Verdi's La Forza del Destino, the force of destiny, but it clearly wasn't destiny that was herd these two together. It was a deliberate hand. The music was rich and pretty until it became too much for Citra's ears, and the story, while easy to follow even without knowledge of Italian, had little renaissance for either of them. It was, after all, the work of the age of mortality. War, vengeance, murder, all these themes of which the tale was strung, were so removed from reality, few could relate. Catharsis could only gather around the theme of love, which, considering that they were strangers trapped in an opera box, was far more uncomfortable than cathartic. So, who do you think invited us? Citra asked as soon as the lights came up for the first act intermission. Rowan had no more clue than she did, and they shared whatever they had might help to generate a theory. Aside from those being 16, they had very little in common. She was from the city, he was the suburbs. She had a small family, his was large, and their parents' professions wouldn't be further apart. What's your genetic index? He asked. Rather personal question, but perhaps it would have some relevance. 2237121415. He smiled. 37% African descent. Good for you. That's pretty high. Thanks. He told her that his was 33, 13, 12, 22, 20. She thought to ask him if he knew the substance and other component, because 20% was pretty high, but he didn't know the question would embarrass him. We both have 12% Pan-Asian ancestry, he pointed out. Could that be something to do with it? But he was grasping at straws. It was merely coincidence. Then, toward the end of the intermission, an answer stepped into the box behind them. Good to see you're getting acquainted. Although it had been a few months since their encounter, Citra recognized him immediately. Honorable Scythe Faraday was not a figure you would soon forget. You, Querolin said, with such severity that it was clear that he had a bad history with the Scythe as well. I would have arrived sooner, but I had other business. He didn't elaborate, for which Citra was glad. Still, his presence here could not be a good thing. You invited us here to glean us? It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, because Citra was convinced it was true. Until Rowan said, I don't think that's what this is about. Scythe Faraday did not make any move to end their lives. Instead, he grabbed an empty chair and sat beside them. I was given this box by a theater director. People always think making offerings to Scythe will prevent them from gleaning. I had no intention of gleaning her, but now she thinks her gift played a part. People can believe what they want to believe, Rowan said, with a sort of authority that told Citra he knew the truth of it. Faraday gestured toward the stage. Tonight we witness a spectacle of human folly and tragedy, he said. Tomorrow we shall live it. And the curtain went up in the second act before he could explain his meaning. For 2 months, Rowan had been the school parrot, an outcast of the highest order. Although this sort of thing usually ran its course and diminished over time, it was not the case when it came to the gleaning of Cole Whitlock. Every football game rubbed a healthy dose of salt in the communal wound, and since all those games were lost, it doubled the pain. Rowan was never particularly popular, nor was he ever the target of derision before, but now he was cornered and beaten to a regular basis. He was shunned. Even his friends actively avoided him. Tiger was no exception. Guilt by association, man, Tiger said. I feel your pain, but I don't want to live it. It's an unfortunate situation, the principal told Rowan when he turned up to the nurse's office, waiting out during lunch with some newly inflicted bruises to heal. You may want to consider switching schools. Then one day, Rowan gave in to pressure. He stood on the table of the cafeteria and told everyone the lies they wanted to hear. That Scythe was my uncle, he proclaimed. I told him to glean Cole Whitlock. Of course, they believed every word of it. Kids began to boo and throw food at him until he said, I want you all to know that my uncle is coming back. and he asked me to choose who gets gleaned next. Suddenly, the food stopped flying, the glare ceased, and beatings miraculously stopped. He filled the void was, well, a void. Not a single eye would meet his anymore, not even the teachers that would look at him. A few actually started giving him A's when he was doing B and C work. He began to feel like a ghost in his own life, existing in a forced blind spot of the world. At home, things were normal. His stepfather stayed entirely out of his business, and his mother was preoccupied with too many other things to give much attention to his troubles. They knew that it had happened at school, and it was happening now. They dismissed it in a self-serving way parents often had, pretending anything they can solve is not really a problem. I want to transfer to a different high school, he told his mother, finally taking his principal's advice, and her response was achingly neutral. If you think that's best, if it's half convinced that he told her he was dropping out of society and joining a tone cult, she'd say, if you think that's best. And then the opera invitation arrived. He didn't care who sent it. Whatever it meant, it was salvation, at least for an evening. The girl he met in the box seat was nice enough, pretty, confident. The kind of girl who probably already had a boyfriend, although she never mentioned one. And then the Scythe showed up, and Rowan's world shifted back into a dark place. This was the man responsible for his misery. If he could have gotten away with it, Rowan would have pushed him over the railing, but his attacks against the Scythe were not tolerated. The punishment was the gleaning of the offender's entire family. It was a consequence that ensured the safety of the revered bringers of death. It was close to the opera. Scythe Faraday gave him a card and very clear instructions. You will meet me at this address tomorrow morning, precisely at 9. Should we tell our parents about tonight? Citra asked. Apparently she had parents who might care. Tell them whatever you like. It doesn't matter, as long as you're there tomorrow morning. This address turned out to be the Museum of World Art, the finest museum in the city. It didn't open until 10, but the moment the security guard saw the Scythe coming up the steps in the main entrance, she unlocked the doors and let the three of them in without even having to be asked. More perks to the position, Scythe Faraday told them. They strolled through the galleries and the old masters in silence, punctuated by the only sound of their footfalls and the Scythe's occasional commentary. See how El Gliso uses contrast to evoke emotional yearning? Look at the fluidity of the motion in this Raphael, how it brings intensity to the visual story he tells. Ah, Sirrat, prophetic pointillism, a century before the pixel. Rowan was the first to ask the necessary question. Why does any of this have to do with us? Scythe Faraday sighed in the mild irritation, although he probably anticipated the question. I am supplying you with lessons you won't receive in school. So, Citra said, you pulled us out of our lives for some random art lesson? Isn't this a waste of your valuable time? The Scythe laughed, and Rowan found himself wishing he had been the one to make him laugh. What have you learned so far? Scythe Faraday asked. Neither was a response, and he asked a different question. What do you think our conversation would have been like if I'd brought you to post-mortality galleries instead of these older ones? Rowan ventured an answer. Probably about how much easier to the point post-mortal art is. Easier and untroubled. And how about uninspired? Prompted the Scythe. That's a matter of opinion, said Citra. Perhaps, but now that you know what you're looking for in this art of the dying, I want you to try to feel it. And he led him to the next gallery. Although Rowan was sure he'd feel nothing, he was wrong. The next room was a huge gallery of paintings hanging in the floors and ceilings. He didn't recognize the artist, but that didn't matter. There's coherence to the work as if it had been painted by the same soul, if not the same hand. Some works had religious theme, others were portraits, and others simply captured the elusive light of daily life and the vibrancy that was missing the post-mortal art. Longing, the elation, anguish, and joy, they were all there, sometimes comingly, and the same canvas was only some ways unsettling, but compelling as well. Can we stay in this room a little longer? Rowan asked. This made the Scythe smile. Of course we can. The museum had opened by the time they were done. Other patrons gave them a wide berth. It reminded Rowan of the way they treated him at school. Citra seemed to have no clue why Scythe Faraday had called them, but Rowan was beginning to have an idea. He took the kids to dinner, where the waitress sat them immediately and brought them menus, ignoring the other customers to give them priority. Perk of position, Rowan noticed, that no one come in once they were seated. The restaurant would probably be empty by the time they left. If you want us to provide you information on people we know, Citra said as her food came. I'm not interested. I gather my own information, Scythe Faraday told her. I don't need a couple of kids to be my informants. But you do need us, don't you? Rowan said. He didn't answer. Instead, he talked about world population and the task of the world's size. It's not level it, then to wrangle in the reasonable ratio. The ratio of population growth of the Thunderhead's ability to provide for humanity requires that a certain number of people be gleaned each year, he told them. For that to happen, we're going to need more Scythes. Then he produced from one of many pockets hidden in his robe Scythe's rings identical to the one he already wore. It caught the light of the room, reflecting it, refracting it, but never bending the light into a heart of its dark core. 3 times a year, Scythes meet in a great assembly called the Conclave. We discuss the business of gleaning and whether or not more Scythes are needed in our region. Citra now seemed to shrink in her chair. She finally got it, although Rowan had suspected this to actually see the ring that made him shrink a bit too. The gems on Scythe's rings were made in those first post-mortal days by the elderly Scythe, Faraday said. Then society deemed that unnatural death seemed to take place of natural death. There were many more gems made in them were needed at the time, for the founders of the Scythedom were wise enough to anticipate a need. When a new scythe is required, a gem is placed in a gold setting and bestowed upon the chosen candidate. He turned the ring in his finger, pondering and sending it reflected light dancing around the room. Then he looked him in the eye. First Citra, then Rowan. I just returned from Winter Conclave, and have been given this ring so that I might take on an apprentice. Citra backed away. Rowan can do it. I'm not interested. Rowan turned to her, wishing he had spoken. What makes you think I am? I have chosen both of you, Faraday said, raising his voice. You will both learn the trade, but in the end, only one of you will receive the ring. The other may return home to his or her old life. Why would we compete for something that neither of us want? Citra asked. Therein lies the paradox of the profession, Faraday said. Those who wish to have the job should not have it, and those who would most refuse to kill are the ones who should. He would put the ring away, and Rowan let out his breath, not even realizing he had been holding it. You are both made in the highest mortal fiber, Faraday told them, and I believe the high ground on which you stand will compel you into my apprenticeship. Not because I force it upon you, but because you choose it. And then he left without paying the bill, because no bill was, or should ever be, brought to a Scythe. The nerve to think he would impress them with the airs of culture, and reel them into this sick little scheme. There was no way Citra could ever, under any circumstances, throw away her life by becoming a taker of other people's lives. She told her parents what had happened, and when they got home that evening, her father embraced her, and she cried into his arms for giving the terrible proposition. Then her mother said something that Citra was not expecting. Will you do it? She asked. The fact that she could even ask the question was more of a shock than seeing the ring held out to her that morning. What? It's a difficult choice, I know, her father said. We'll support you either way. She looked at them as if he had never truly seen them before at that moment. How could her parents know her so little that they would think she'd become a Scythe's apprentice? She doesn't even know what to say to them. Would you, want me to? She found herself terrified of her answer. We want what you want, honey, her mother said, but look at it in perspective. A Scythe wants for nothing in this world. All your needs and desires will be met, and you'd never have to fear being gleaned. And then something occurred to Citra. You'd never have to worry about being gleaned either. A Scythe's family is immune from gleaning for as long as the Scythe is alive. Her father shook his head. It's not about our immunity, and then she realized he was telling the truth. It's not about yours, but it's about Ben's, Citra said. To that, they didn't have an answer. The memory of Scythe Faraday's unexpected intrusion into their home was still a dark specter haunting them. By the time they'd known why they was there, it was not very well been there to glean Citra or Ben. But if Citra became a Scythe, they'd never need to fear an unexpected visitor again. You want me to spend my life killing people? Her mother looked away. Please, Citra, it's not killing, it's gleaning. It's important. It's necessary. Sure, nobody likes it, but everyone agrees to what happens, and someone has to do it. Why not you? Citra went to bed early that night, before supper, because her appetite was casually out of the day. Her parents came to her door several times, but she told them to go away. She had never been sure what path her life would take. She assumed that she would go to college, get a degree in something pleasant, then settle into a comfortable job, meet a comfortable guy, and have a nice, unremarkable life. It's not that she longed for such existence, but it had been expected, not just her, but of everyone. With nothing to really aspire to, life had become more about maintenance, eternal maintenance. Could she possibly find a greater purpose in the gleaning of human life? The answer was a resolute no. If that were the case, then why did she find it so hard to sleep? For Rowan, the decision wasn't quite so difficult. Yes, he hated the thought of being a Scythe. It sickened him, but what sickened him more was the thought of just about anyone else he knew doing it. He didn't see himself as morally superior to anyone, but he did have a keener sense of empathy. He felt for people, something more than he felt for himself, but which drove him to Cole's gleaning. It was what brought him to the tiger's side each and every time he splat. And Rowan already knew what it was like to be a Scythe. He tried separate and apart from the rest of the world. He was living that now, and would bear the life, live it forever. Maybe he was living that now, would live it forever. Maybe he wouldn't have to. Scythes got together, didn't they? They had conclaves 3 times a year, must befriend one another. It was the world's most elite club. No, he didn't want to be part of it, but he had called to it. It would be a burden, but also the ultimate honor. He didn't tell his family that day because he didn't want them to sway his decision. Immunity for all of them? Of course they wanted to accept it. He was loved, but only one among the group had beloved things. If a sacrifice would save the rest, the greater familial good would be served. In the end, it was the art that did it. The canvases haunted his dreams that night, but it must live like the age of morality. full of passions, both good and bad. Fear giving rise to faith, despair giving meaning to elation. They say even winters are colder and the summers were warmer in those days. To live between the prospects of unknown eternal sky and dark enveloping earth must have been glorious, for now else could it have been such given rise to magnificent expression. No one created anything of value anymore, but if by gleaning he could bring back a hint of what was, it might be worth it. Could he find it himself to kill another human being? Not one, just one, but many, day after day, year after year, until he reached down his own eternity? Scythe Faraday believed he could. The following morning, before he left for school, he told his mother that the Scythe invited him to become an apprentice, and that he'd be dropping out of school to accept the position. If you think that's best, she said. I had my cultural audit today. It happens only once a year, but it's nevertheless stressful. This year, when they crunched each cultural index of those I gleaned over the past 12 months, I thankfully came up well within my accepted parameters. 20% Caucasoid to 18% Afric, 20% Pan-Asian, 19% Meso-Latino, and 23% other. Sometimes it's hard to know a person's index is considered private, so we can only go by the visible traits, which are no longer as obvious as they've been in the past generations. When Scythe's numbers became lopsided, they were disciplined by the High Blade and are assigned to their gleanings for the next year, rather than being allowed to choose for themselves. It's a sign of shame. The index is supposed to keep the world free from cultural and genetic bias, but aren't there underlying factors that we can't escape? For instance, who decided the first number of one genetic index would be Caucasoid? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. It's a very good question. Why would Caucasoid be the first? Of course, Caucasoid being a play on words of Caucasian. Strange. Anyways, today we read pages 31 to 47. Next time we'll be reading 48 to 64, chapters 4 to 5, but it's not going to say that. It's going to say 04 to 05, but now it just says, oh, but Stonsey, it only says 04. I know that. Whoop. Okay, 04 to 05. Happy? You better be. Yeah. So, I've, of course, had a few cuts so I can work on the bookets and stuff. This is very short of a book. Very weird. I haven't had a short book in a minute. And by that, I mean short episodes. Understand, I just came out of a book that literally would take me 50 minutes to read. So going into a book that now takes me 20 minutes feels definitely strange. But, yeah. What doesn't feel strange is that it's time for... Reading Corner of the Day, doing it up Stonsey's way, bop. Today we are learning about the Saint Bernard. That dog does not want to be here. Did you see that little puppy dog? See that one? Look at him. He's like, I don't want to be here, man. I don't want to be in this stupid video. Who's forcing me to be here? That poor dog. That poor little dog. But yeah. Before I can make fun of it or say anything about it, I should learn of its history. Not only does it make me look smart in front of my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, or my bottled water full of sour orange Gatorade, or Kool-Aid, my bad. It also makes me more intelligent. Now, intelligence doesn't necessarily lie in just knowing things. It also lies in knowing and teaching things. That's why some of the smartest people you ever meet are teachers and doctors. Though, there are some dumb teachers, and there's definitely some dumb doctors. So, yeah. The history of the Saint Bernard is that the Saint Bernard probably has its roots in the Roman Malaysian dogs, but it doesn't until between 1660 and 1670 that the breed developed the magnificent dog responsible for saving so many lives. Around this time, the first of these large dogs arrived at the St. Bernard Hospice, a refuge for travelers crossing between Switzerland and Italy. The St. Bernards originally came from the help pull carts and turn spits, may also have been function as watchdogs or companions. But the monks soon found them invaluable pathfinders through deep snow. The dogs were adept at locating lost travelers. When the dog found a person, it would lick the person's face and lie beside them, and thus reviving and warming the person. The dogs continued to serve the invaluable role for 3 centuries, saving over 2,000 lives. The most famous of all St. Bernards was Barry, who was credited in saving 40 lives. Before Barry's death, the dogs were known with several names, including hospice dogs, but by the time he died, he was of fame that the dogs were called Barryhund in his honor. In the early 1800s, many of the dogs were lost to severe weather, disease, and inbreeding. Some of the remaining dogs were crossed with Newfoundlands in 1830. As a result, the first long-coated dogs of St. Bernard type appeared, although it seemed that long hair would keep a dog in the cold snow. In fact, it hindered them as ice clung to the coat. Thus, these long-haired dogs were not kept for rescue work. The first saints came to England around 1810, served in many different names. Among the some sacred dog by 1865, the name St. Bernard was in common use, and it became an official name in 1880. Around this time, the breed caught the eye of an American fanciers. By 1900, the St. Bernard was extremely popular, although it has since vacillated in popularity. It is always one of the most popular of the giant breeds. Very cool history. So, what if I want one of these saviors in my home? What's their temperament? Are they good with kids? They may save lives, but are they good with kids? Well, the temperament is that the calm, easygoing St. Bernard is gentle and patient around children. Although it's not particularly playful, it is devoted to its family and willing to please, although its own pace. It can be stubborn. Well, it looks stubborn, so I agree. What's the upkeep? How do I keep this savior good and running in my home? Well, the upkeep is that the St. Bernard needs daily exercise in order to stay fit. Its requirements can be met with a moderate walks or short runs. However, it's best raised outdoors away from slick surfaces. Overweight puppies raised indoors are more prone to hip problems and enjoys cold weather and does not do well in heat. The breed can live outside in temperate to cold weather, but it does best when allowed access to both house and yard. Its coat, whether long or short, needs weekly brushing, more so when shedding. All saints drool. Goodness. Well, if you are a child, please cover your ears or just ignore. If you're an adult or teenager and you own a St. Bernard, please listen up for the health concerns. We're going to be talking about the major concerns, minor concerns, what they're occasionally seen with, suggested tests when you take them to the doctor, lifespan, and a personal note from the second edition Carleen Colley PhD. Major concerns are CHD, capsular torsion, entropin, ectropin, elbow dysplasia, and osteosarcoma. Minor concerns are OCD, diabetes, seizures, heart conditions, cardiomyopathy, and CVI and hotspots. They're occasionally seen with distichiasis. I swear if I heard the word, I would know it. The suggested test should be for the hip, elbow, cardiac, and eye. Lifespan is 8 to 10 years, and that it's noted that the St. Bernard does not tolerate heat well. Huh. We could have learned that from the tier list, but whatever. I guess hearing it out of the words of Miss Colley would help somewhat. Anyways, I don't have a kid, and I don't see in front of me. So what's the form? What's the function? What do they look like? Well, the form and function of the St. Bernard is that its imposing St. Bernard is powerful and proportionately tall. It's strong and well-muscled, necessary qualities in the dog that must trek through deep snow or miles. Its coat comes in two types: smooth, in which the short hair is very dense, and tough and long, in which the medium-length hair is straight and slightly wavy. The expression should appear intelligent. Wow, not slightly longer than tall. That's a first. Now, for the tier list, 5 is the best, 4 is better, 3 is average, 2 is the worst, is worse, and 1 is the worst unless it comes to grooming. Energy level, exercise requirements are at a 2, so lower than normal. Playfulness is a 3. Yeah, so average. Affection level is at a 4, as well as friendliness towards other pets. Friendliness towards dogs and strangers are at a 3, as well as ease of training, which means average. Watchdog abilities at a 2, protection abilities at a 1. Grooming requirements for smooth St. Bernards are at a 2, which is not good, though for long hair is at a 3, which is definitely not good. They have a huge buff because of cold tolerance being at a 5, but have a huge decrease because heat tolerance is at a 1. If you own a St. Bernard's, be in the cold. The weight of both a healthy male and female St. Bernard is 120 to 200 pounds. Kind of a wide margin, so you should be fine. Height of a male St. Bernard is minimum 27.5 inches, and for a female is 25 inches, because if it was feet, we'd be living in a world of giants. Not so much giant as it is fluffy and invisible. The next breed of dog that we're going to be learning about is the one you'll be learning about in the next episode. So, I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite. Be efficient. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to also download Cookie Clicker because that's a fun game to do when you're making audiobooks. And I'll see you guys next time.